Today we're going to discuss a little bit how you go about optimizing conversions within an online environment. So we've been talking about all sort of activities that you can do, from email marketing to search engine optimization to advertising online. What we're going to talk about today is how do you go about leveraging all that data that you can actually obtain online so that you can decide whether one of the tools that you're using is working better than another, and within each of those tools, how can you design more optimal campaigns so that you can maximize a variable of interest. Now, I'm going to focus on conversion in general, but this could be any variable that you're interested in. So what we're doing essentially from a math perspective is this idea of optimization. What does that mean? The idea is pick a variable of interest, in our case conversion, whether somebody actually does an action or not. It could be to sign up for your newsletter, it could be to buy your product, it could be to create a profile in your website, it could be to download a newsletter, whatever it is, right? Pick that variable that you're interested in, and now our goal is to see if we can achieve the highest possible result for that variable, right? So you can think about this as trying to find the highest point in a mountain. Now, this mountain, what it is trying to capture is the fact that there are some variables, things that you can change, right? In this case, we have two of them. And as you do different things with these variables, right, you're going to get a different result. So what could these variables be, right? A variable for us is going to be anything that you can create online. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say that you're doing email marketing. What could a variable be? Well, the title or the subject line that you use for the email is one variable. And now what's going to happen is along that variable, you're going to be able to choose different words that you're going to use. Even the arrangement in what order those words are used and how the sentence is constructed is something that you can vary, you can change, right? So different titles, for example, or different images within a search advertising campaign, or different keywords, right? Or different posts within social media, right? So you might have two ways of telling a story, and you can actually test which one of those two, and it doesn't have to be two, you could have 27, right, is actually want to be the one that achieves more conversions for you. Conversion might be to click on that post, for example, right? Or, you can do the same thing with landing pages, right? Once that they have click, the page that actually shows up, for example, the product or the service that you're trying to sell, right? How is defined, how is crafted, what kind of information is in there, do you have a video or no video, just images, right? All those things are essentially variables that you can change. And as you change those, you're gonna get a lower conversion rate or a higher conversion rate, right? So optimizing a system is trying to essentially climb this mountain until you get to the highest point in the relationship between your design variables and in this case conversion. Okay, so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how you go about doing this, and what we're going to discuss is essentially this idea of experiments, right? What we're going to be doing is, whenever you're interested in general whether something pushes something else higher or lower, right? We typically call that a causal relationship, right? Something you change, in this case, something that it's under your control, right? And then you see what the effect is in another variable, in this case, something that it's not directly under your control, like conversion, right? Or sales, or clicks by a visitor, right? And see whether that effect actually is positive in the direction that you're moving, or maybe negative, right? So that idea is essentially what traditionally we have called causal research. So I'm going to hint a little bit about what causal research is and what kind of tools we use to to ascertain that so that we can actually optimize our system. Okay. Now, what is causal research? Causal research is essentially when you're interested in seeing what happens when you change one variable and what kind of impact it has in another. Okay, so when you change a variable x, what happens to your variable y? Y could be anything. In our case, we've been talking about sales, so you could have sales, right? But it could be also whether somebody signs up for an email newsletter, or it could be the number of people that actually go to our website, right? That would be traffic, right? So it could be all sort of variables, right? The number of people that put a product into our cart. That might be an intermediate variable that you're trying to maximize or make it as big as possible, optimize it in some way, right? Now, you need to understand, for us to demonstrate or to make sure that something is causing something else, there are a series of stringent conditions that you need to fulfill. The first one we call concomitant variation, and that means that both variables, x and y, need to move together. Whether it is positive, like you have in this diagram, the more of one, the more of the other. It could also be negative, and it still will be concomitant variation. And it could actually take a nonlinear form, right, where the shape is not necessarily aligned, like in this case. Okay, I don't care what shape it is, but they both need to be moving simultaneously in some predictable direction. Okay, then we say that we have concomitant variation. Otherwise, there is no causal relationship. I think this is simple, right? The next thing is x needs to move first before y moves, right? So the temporal order in the changes, it needs to be such that first is the variable that you think is the cause moving, and then the effect needs to happen. There needs to be a temporal change in between the two of them. Otherwise, you do not know what caused what. Okay. And then finally, and this is the most difficult condition to fulfill, is you need to eliminate any other alternative explanations. So anything else that could have made your sales higher needs to be eliminated before I can say that it's advertising budget, the one that is determining my sales, right? So these two, we're going to be able to ascertain. The first one, we just look at some sort of relational variable, right? So for example, we can look at correlations here, although there are other ways of doing this, right? Or differences if you have two groups, right? That's going to tell you whether there is something going on, right? The second one, we're going to be able to ascertain if we collect the data in the right way, right? First, we collect the x variable, and then we collect the y variable, right? But the last effect is going to be challenging. And to make sure that as much as possible, no other thing can be blamed or given the reason why our dependent variable change, what we're going to do is we're going to use experiments. Experiments are our best bet in trying to limit any other external factor that could have influenced the results. So now you know what we do experiments, right? What we're going to do in an experiment is we decide which variable is going to get changed, right? So in our old example about advertising, what we could do is spend more or less money. That will be the variable that we control, right? That's the variable that we are changing, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure and see what happens with our goal variable, with our KPI, the thing that we are interested in. So what we're doing essentially is we're categorizing these variables in two groups. One is the independent variable. These are the variables that we can change, typically. And then you have the dependent variable, which is something that we're interested in, but happens maybe as a function of something that we can control, but other things that we cannot. Like in our case, dependent variable will be whether somebody converts in some way. It's typically online, it's going to be a CTA, right? And independent variable are going to be things that we can change, right? Like for example, the frequency at which we post in a social media, right? We might change from 2 posts a week to 1 post a week and see what happens to conversion rates when we do that, right? So conversion rate will be our dependent variable, and our independent variable in that example will be the frequency with which we post, because it's under our control. We're trying to see whether that affects conversion rates, and if so, how. Okay. Now to do this online, what we're going to do simplistically, and I say simplistically because it can get quite complicated, is this idea of A/B testing. Okay. What's beautiful about doing anything online is that we have almost immediate data, and that enables us to optimize the system by finding what impacts what, and we can tweak and change and improve even what a lot of people will consider minor details. Okay. Now, how do you do this? Well, you start by picking your KPI. Decide what variable are you interested in optimizing, right? This could be the number of clicks in a post, right? Or this could be the number of sales of a product. Or this could be the number of impressions in a blog post, for example, right? Many things that you could actually use as your key performance indicator. Right? That is the goal. And now what you're trying to do is see how other things that you can do affect that KPI, right? So for example, in the case of that blog post, we might consider announcing that blog post that is already being put up in 2 different social media platforms. One could be LinkedIn and the other one might be Twitter, right? And we create a copy of an ad so that we can actually let everybody know at those 2 different social media platforms that we posted in our blog site. Okay. And now the idea is to see what happens when we do this variation. What happens when we post in Twitter? What happens when we post in Facebook? This doesn't have to be the only variable that you can consider. You can have the same social media platform, like both post in Facebook, but in one case you use one title, in another case you use another. Or it could be the same title, same social media platform, but in one case you use one image and in the other one you use a different image. So you get the point. You can test infinite number of things here, right? Then your next step after you have decided what is the variable that you're trying to test and what is your goal, right, your KPI, then what you're going to do is you're going to randomly assign people that come your way to either option A or option B, right? So if you have 2 different images in your advertising, now what you need to do is you need to make sure that Google Ads, for example, if you're using Google Ads, has 2 campaigns, one with image 1 and one with image B. And then what you do is you tell Google to 50% of your traffic directed in one direction and 50% to the other. Okay. Now, the idea here is simple, right? If you are randomly sending people in 2 different directions and the only thing that changes between these 2 is the image, everything else is the same. The only thing that changes the image in one is one picture and the other one is the other. If you observe any differences in the KPI of interest across these 2 groups, it has to be because of the image, because in every other way, everything else is the same. It's the same subject line, it's the same description, it's the same link, it's the same platform, it's the same, and people are randomly assigned to minimize the chances that maybe the people that went here and the ones that went here are different. The way you do that is randomization. So assuming that you did all this, if you find that the conversion rate in one is 24% and the other one is 17%, and that difference is significant statistically, which we'll get to in a minute, then you will argue that, hey, we should go about using this image because it has better results. And now you can move to try to tweak some other part of your design. Okay, once that you have locked in the right image to be used for your campaign, or the right design for your website, or the right design for your landing page, or you get the point, right? Now, this might look like a complex step, and if every element you want to change, this might take a long time. If you have sufficiently large traffic, and this is a big if, you're going to see the results of traffic in a minute, right? You can test multiple variables at the same time. The idea of doing this is instead of creating just two groups, right? Like one with one image and one with another. Now what you can do is you can create, for example, 4 groups where they vary by image, like I said before, but they also vary by title, for example. So you have 2 titles and 2 images. When I say 2, by the way, you can have 4, you can have 6. Okay, obviously the more differences that you have, the more options that you have, the more data you need. So, you know, the more time consuming is going to be to collect the data so that you can have results or not. Okay, but you can do multivariate testing. That means where instead of only testing 2 groups, meaning one factor, one variable that you're changing, when you do multiple ones. Okay, and the only limitation for this in real life, which is a real limitation, it's the amount of time that it's going to take you to run the experiment. Okay, unless you have really, really large amounts of traffic, like for example, I don't know, Google or Microsoft have, where they have millions of visits per day, right? If not hundreds of millions. And it's going to take you a long time to run these experiments if you go beyond 1 or 2 factors, okay? But it's a possibility. Good. Now, let me show you here with a concrete set of examples what it is that I mean by the amount of time that it's going to take you is going to be a function of things like whether it's a multivariate or a univariate test, meaning whether you're testing one thing or many things simultaneously, right? So I'm going to go with a made-up example, right? But you can play with this if you want. There are many A/B test calculators online that you can use for free. There are some paid tools that are more sophisticated than this. And this is based on statistical power analysis. Okay. I don't know how much you know about statistics, but in statistics, what we're doing is we're setting a null hypothesis. In our case, the null hypothesis typically will be that there are no differences between the effects of the 2 factors that you're interested in. What do you mean by that, Professor? For example, in the case of the 2 images and the conversion rates, right? The null hypothesis will be that there is no difference whether you put one image or the other, you get the same conversion test. That will be the null hypothesis. And then what we're doing with this test is we're seeing whether there is significant evidence that that null hypothesis is false. Okay? And if it's false, then you pick the one that has the highest conversion rate. Okay? Now, to do that, you acknowledge the fact that there is uncertainty, meaning you're using a sample to make a determination about the population. Okay? And the key question is, how big does the sample need to be for you to be confident that the result that you're finding is not due to chance? Because it could be. You might have gotten unlucky, right? Maybe one image is better than the other, but the results you're getting is that they are about the same, okay? Because you got unlucky. Now, if your sample size, if the amount of people that actually were assigned to the 2 groups is large enough, you're going to be confident that those results are going to hold in the long term, right? So what I'm trying to show you here is what happens when you're in a specific situation. How long are you going to have to run a test before you're confident that the differences that you observe are actually not due to chance? If they're due to chance, you're in trouble. Right? Good, because you're going to be making decisions thinking that you're right and you're not, or at least you don't have evidence to suggest that. So let's pick an example, right? I'm going to start with scenario 1. This is going to be kind of like my benchmark. And then based on this, I'm going to vary some of these factors and see how they impact how long it takes you to have sufficient evidence to decide that one thing is better than another. Whatever that thing is, the title, the platform, whatever you're varying or changing, right? Or trying to optimize. So imagine that to your website, you have on average about 500 visitors that are going there. Okay. When I say website, reading your posts, reading your emails, you get the point. Any of the tools that we have discussed in this class, right? Any online asset that is measurable, essentially, right? So this will be the number of impressions, essentially, okay? And then imagine, for argument's sake, that we are only interested in doing two variations. What that means is you only have two images in the previous example that I told you, okay? Just two images, okay? One factor with two conditions, okay? Image A, image B, title A, title B, platform A, platform B, okay? You get the point. In this case, I'm assuming that you're taking everybody that comes to your website or social media platform, whatever it is that you're in, right? In our case, website, and you are using all of them to run this test. That's what 100% means. Okay, you could use less than 100. You obviously cannot use more than 100. Okay. Now, assume, for argument's sake, that our current conversion rate is 12%. And assume that for us, conversion rates means people that actually download our free white paper. Okay, so they go to our site, and out of going to our site, 12% of people download our paper right now, white paper or newsletter, I don't care, whatever it is, or buy our product, right? Now, here is where you're going to have to speculate, right? If the action that you're undertaking, it's going to have a big impact in your conversion rate, you will capture that here. What is a big impact? Well, this is a 20% increase, hopefully increase, in our conversion rate. In our case, that will mean 20% of 12%, which that is about 2.5%. Okay, so we are hoping that this is going to push us, whatever, like a new campaign that we're doing, for example, that is going to push us from 12% conversion rate to 14%, 14.5%, right, to be precise. And that will be the expected improvement. You might not know this, but as you're going to see, this impacts how much data you need. This is associated with what statisticians will call effect size, which is how large of an effect is your intervention having, right? And the larger the effect it has, the easier it is to detect. So the lower the amount of data we need, and because of that, you're going to have to run the experiment for less time. So if you have this situation, 500 people just testing two combinations, you use everybody, you have conversion rate of 12%, and you expect to find effects in the order of about 20% improvement, and then you need to run the experiment in this case for 12 days. Okay, if you do the math, that is about 6,000 people you need before you can say that any effects that you find between the two different groups are actually statistically significant. And even if you see a difference a week in, you shouldn't stop the test, you should wait, because chances are that unless you wait sufficiently, the results you're going to get are wrong. Okay. Now that's what this calculator tells me. This is how long I need to run the experiment for. Now what happens if instead of only two things I'm testing, what if I'm testing 4? What if instead of 2 images in my campaign, now I have 4, like 4 different images? Or what if I have 2 images and 2 titles, right? That will give me a total of 4 combinations, right? So in a situation like that, if I have 4, but everything else is the same as before, so 500 people come every day, 100% of the visitors are used, and 12% conversion rate with a 20% expected improvement, it will take me roughly 23 days to achieve the same confidence as I had here. Okay. By the way, typical confidence for this calculator is 95%. Okay, in case you're wondering. Although you could vary that if you had a more sophisticated calculator. And okay. Next scenario, what happens if we are willing to find bigger effects? So we are kind of saying, okay, if there is a smaller effect than 30% improvement, I don't care. It needs to be at least this much. That will mean it needs to improve my conversion rate at least by 3.5%, roughly, right? 3.6%, because 30% of 12, right? Now, in this case, with the same numbers as we started with, the number of days that it will take me is 5. So it takes me a lot less time, and hence a lot less people or sample size is needed if I'm willing to forego smaller effects than 30% improvement. 30% improvement in our case with this baseline, it means about 3.5% improvement, right? So the more precise you want to be, the larger the sample size you need. And if you are willing to be less precise and find only big effects or big improvements, then yeah, you can run the test for less time, right? But you might miss on the smaller improvements. You will find less rejections of your null hypothesis, which remembers that there is no improvement, right? Next, what happens if I'm a smaller player and I have less visitors to my site? Well, if you hold everything else constant as we did in the beginning, then the number of days that it's going to take you to find an effect is roughly double, right? Because we are halving, a little bit more than halving, our number of visitors. So accumulating the sample size is going to take longer, as you can see here, right? In this case, it's going to take us about 23 days to decide whether it was an improvement or not. And then finally, and this is not under your control, but I want you to see the effect. If your conversion rate is larger, okay, than it was in the beginning, okay, and everything else is the same as it was in the beginning, it's going to take you less days for you to decide whether that change that you made across the two different conditions is an improvement or not. You can play with this if you want to check different combinations. I just did some basic one factor effects. You can obviously combine multiple and see different effects. Now, from a process perspective, how would you proceed? Well, let me tell you a couple of things. One is every serious operator online uses A/B testing. It is extremely powerful. You should do it. You have the tools to do it. There are even dedicated tools within the Google ecosystem, if that's what you're using, to do this for free. It's called Google Optimize. It's fairly new, but it works pretty well. If you want, there are companies that will help you do this systematically. Currently, I know, for example, Microsoft is running simultaneously over 1,000 different versions of Bing website to test different factors of what works better or what works worse within their advertising platform, right? And this is just from their own internal design, trying to maximize the effect that their advertising campaigns have for them, not for other companies externally. They are doing a lot more variations than that based on that, okay? And of course, that's because they have huge visitor numbers. You probably cannot run thousands of versions of your website, but you can definitely run 2, 4, maybe even 8 versions of your site if you are a mid-sized player, okay? How do you go about it? The first thing you do is you identify what you're trying to optimize. What is the goal that you're trying to achieve, right? And start, I'm going to tell you another secret. It's not a secret, right? The lower you are in the conversion, the more complex it is to optimize because the more factors that are in between. So start with basic stuff, right? Like traffic, okay? Start by increasing your traffic numbers. This should be actually easy for you to do. So try different things, try different advertising campaigns, and what effects they have, for example, on your traffic within your website. Okay, that's a good starting point. After you get good at that, then you can start moving down the funnel, okay, and go from things like visits to clicks, and from clicks to conversions that are more sophisticated, like sales or some other action, okay, like a newsletter. Okay. Then next best practice of where to start from, and you can obviously get more advanced as you go. Start one variable at a time. Okay. Pick one variable that you want to test for, run a few experiments, okay, and then see what happens. Okay. Pick one at a time. If you do too many things at the same time in the beginning, you're gonna get lost. Next, it is essential that you randomize people. Okay, most platforms enable you to do this, and you don't need to have a special randomization, but if it's an option, request it. Next, use an online calculator to decide, based on your current stats, okay, the number of visitors you have, the conversion rates that you have, etc. What is the length that you should wait for the study to complete? And avoid being impatient and running with the results you get before that time happens. It might be due to chance. This is why calculators exist, power calculators. Then analyze the data. You get more sophisticated, you might want to run some stats on this. Okay, you might start looking at p-values, right? You might do something more sophisticated like bootstrapping, right? But that's way beyond the scope of this class. Okay. And then after you get good with one variable, and I would say one variable early in the conversion funnel, then move to the next one and keep running this over and over again and get good at it, because this is going to improve your results online dramatically. That's all I have for you guys.